Hey y'all, so today I'm talking about the 4 documents you need to apply for tax exempt status. Let's get into it. Hey y'all, this is Tiffany with Boss on a Budget. I help new and small nonprofits get up and running. If you need help with your nonprofit, check me out, subscribe to this channel, and also visit www.bossonabudget.com. Okay, so today I'm going to walk through 4 documents you need to have handy when you're applying for tax exempt status. And I just want to be very specific that I'm talking about 501c3 tax exempt status. You got to know the difference. You got to know why you're applying for it opposed to something else. And even if you're applying for 501c3 tax exempt status, you need to be clear on whether or not you're a public charity or a private foundation. All this stuff is important. You need to do this research before you start applying with the IRS. I have other videos that break down the difference between those two and also goes over nonprofit terms that you need to know when you're applying for tax exempt status. I'm not going to go into detail. Just check out those videos after you watch this. So if you're applying for 501c3 tax exempt status, and remember that's a very specific type of tax exempt status, it is reserved for organizations that do charitable work, that are religious in nature, educational, scientific. There's a definition of that provided by the IRS, which I'm going to actually put below in the description box. But if that fits you, which is most people who want to do like direct services and work directly with their community, most of you would probably be a public charity. So if you want to apply to be a 501c3 public charity, there are 2 different forms that you can fill out. There's the 1023-EZ, which is the streamlined version of the other form, which is 1023. That is the IRS form that you would fill out and submit online to apply to have 501c3 tax exempt status. So what I'm talking about today are the documents you need to have on hand as you're preparing those forms when you are applying for tax exempt status. Keep in mind that if you're using the EZ form, you don't necessarily have to submit any documentation. You just have to verify that whatever is required to be in the documents I'm going to talk about today is actually listed, but you don't have to submit it unless they follow up with you and they ask questions. Now, they meaning the IRS, if you are submitting the 1023, you're going to have to attach these documents. You're going to have to send them in. So it just depends on what form you're using, whether or not you actually have to prove and show to the IRS that these documents are in place. So without further ado, here are the 4 documents you should have when you're applying for tax exempt status. And these are the basics, right? There may be more documents that you need based on your individual situation, but these are 4 documents in particular that you should have regardless. The first one is your organizing document. It is the document that you submitted to the state that you're operating in to say that, hey, we're a business, we're established. So you applied, you developed some articles, the state approved that and sent it back and said, bam, you're a business, you're good to go. Whatever you use to apply to be a business, which in most states is called your articles, that's what you need to have on hand. The reason why you need to have it is because if you want to be a 501c3 nonprofit, there's particular language that you need to have in your articles. The IRS is going to ask you to confirm, and depending on the form you use, you're going to be asked to actually submit the document. So you need to make sure this information is in there. First, you need to verify the purposes of your organization. So you need to verify that it was made for charitable, research, educational, scientific reasons. Again, that language is in the description box below. That language or something very similar to that needs to be in your articles. You also have to indicate that the organization is not to benefit individual people, individual shareholders. That's not the point of a nonprofit organization. And so you have to state that in your articles that it is not to benefit an individual or a group of individuals. The other type of language you need to make sure is in there is around your dissolution. So if the organization decides to dissolve, you're no longer doing work, you need to indicate what happens to your assets. You need to indicate that it either goes to the government or goes to another approved nonprofit, okay? So it has to be released to the public, those assets. The IRS has language on all of this. You do not have to reinvent the wheel. Again, I'm going to put links below, and also I have a startup checklist that's free that walks you through this as well, so you can be clear on what you need to have when you are doing your startup. The second document you need to have is your bylaws. This is a document that is your governing document, governing rules of how your organization operates, in particular how your board of directors operates. So your bylaw is going to list the name, the purpose of your organization. It's going to list how many board members you need to have, what are the term limits, all the different things that establish your organization and establish the ground rules, basically, of how you're to operate. That document needs to be in place when you are submitting or asking for tax exempt status. And depending on the form, you may have to supply that information. I did another video that talks about items you want to have in your bylaws. And just remember, the requirements for your bylaws rest at the state level. So the state will dictate what should be in your bylaws or what should be the ground rules for how you operate. For example, most states will indicate a minimum number of board directors that you have to have. You have to go by state law, which is the state that you're operating in, the state that you're doing business in. So keep in mind that this is a document that you have to kind of compare to state law to make sure you're good, but you're also using this document to show the IRS that you're actually a real organization and you have some kind of information and documentation about how you're going to operate. The third document is your conflict of interest policy. So the IRS is particularly interested in how you manage conflicts of interest. So a conflict of interest may be that someone on your board is related to a contractor, and maybe you want to do a renovation or build something. And so someone on the board says, well, I can just ask my brother to do it, right? That is a potential conflict of interest because it could be that that board member is trying to get business to their brother, right? It's not that you can't use your brother. It's just that you have to document how that decision was made, and the decision has to be made as a group. The board has to make the decision together. The person who's related to that person who may benefit from the organization by getting money or getting a contract has to be removed from that conversation and shouldn't vote on that matter. The rest of the board should vote on that matter, go through the process of assessing whether or not that contractor is the best person, and then move forward. So it's not to say that you can't have a potential conflict. You just have to manage it and document how you're managing those conflicts. Your conflict of interest policy will detail that information and give more details about how you do that, how you disclose potential conflicts, and how you manage them. What are the processes that you have in place to manage those things? Along with your conflict of interest policy, you should have a disclosure form that is filled out annually so that the people who work for your organization or they're affiliated with the organization can disclose any potential conflicts. So if they know that there's a conflict, or maybe they're related to someone on the board, or there's something out there that may be a potential conflict, they should be disclosing that every year. So again, depending on the form that you're going to be asked to fill out or you're going to be required to fill out, you may have to actually send in your conflict of interest policy. So you need to have that in place before you apply. So the last thing you need to have prepared when you're submitting your application for tax exempt status is not necessarily one document. It's multiple documents. It's your operating budget, any financial statements, or any financial information. You need to have that information handy because you're going to have to go into detail, and depending on the form, that dictates the level of detail, but you're going to have to go into detail about your revenue, about your expenses, about your anticipated revenue, your anticipated expenses, who's being compensated, levels of compensation over a certain amount, and also information about cash on hand. So your balance sheet and your assets and your liabilities, you need to have your financial statements together in order to answer those questions. So you got to gather that information early on so you're prepared to fill out the form. Now, this is way easier for new nonprofits because if you just got started and you're just filling out your application form, you don't have a lot of financial data. So it's a lot easier. But for older organizations that have been in operation and for some reason either their status was revoked or they just never got their 501c3 and they're doing it now, This can be complicated. So make sure you have all that information handy, your budget, your financial statements, and any other financial data to make this process easier for you as you're filling out your application. So the moral of the story is you have to do your research when you are applying to be a nonprofit. It's not as easy as it looks on the surface. So make sure that you are prepared when it's time to go before the IRS and ask for tax exempt status. If you need help starting up your nonprofit, check out my nonprofit startup workbook. It actually walks you through from start to finish how to start your nonprofit. If you still don't know how to formulate your nonprofit, you're trying to figure out your idea, you're trying to figure out how you're going to raise money and how to plan for that, how to vision for your nonprofit before you get started, then you need the Nonprofit Business Bundle, which is also listed below. So if you have any questions for me, don't forget to visit me at www.bossonabudget.com, and I will see you in the next video.